The golden light of the late afternoon passed through the large windows of the Great Light, one of the most sophisticated restaurants in Nova York. Customers wearing tailored suits and couture dresses clinked glasses of expensive wine as waiters glided through the room, serving delicately assembled dishes. Dr. Elijah Bennett, a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon, entered the restaurant wearing an impeccable dark blue suit. His day at the hospital had been long, and he just wanted to enjoy a quiet dinner before a medical conference the next day. He headed to the reception desk. "Good night. I have a reservation for Elijah Bennett at 8 p.m. The receptionist, a blonde woman with cold eyes and impeccable posture, typed something into the computer and then frowned. "Are you sure of the name?" Elijah remained calm. "Yes, Bennett. Made 3 days ago." She glanced up and down at him. That look. It was not an error in the system, it wasn't confusion. "Sorry, we don't have any reservations under that name." Elijah took a deep breath. He knew what was going on, but as always, he decided to give the benefit of the doubt. "There must be a mistake. Maybe you can check again?" The receptionist kept her polite but empty smile. "Unfortunately, sir, we are completely booked tonight." He looked over his shoulder. At least 3 empty tables were clearly in sight. Interesting. And those tables? Before the receptionist could respond, a female voice came from behind him. "Excuse me, darling. My reservation for Margaret Whitmore is confirmed, right?" The receptionist lit up in a second. "Of course. Mrs. Whitmore, your table is now ready." The woman, an elderly socialite wearing a fur coat, threw a quick glance at Elijah. Her face showed surprise when she saw him there, then something close to discomfort. "Oh, could you check my reservation one more time?" Elijah insisted, keeping his tone calm. The receptionist discreetly rolled her eyes and pretended to double-check. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can put you on our waiting list. Maybe a vacancy will open up in an hour, who knows?" Elijah was silent for a moment. His fingers drummed on the marble counter. He looked again at the empty tables and the receptionist, who held a fake friendly smile. "An hour, huh?" The receptionist just nodded. "Right, I'll solve this right now." Elijah took his cell phone out of his pocket, scrolled to a number, and pressed call. The phone rang twice before being answered. "This is Dr. Bennett. I'm at the reception at Le Grand Lumière, and it seems like my reservation has disappeared." The receptionist kept smiling, but your gaze wavered for the first time. She had no idea who Elijah Bennett really was. But I was about to find out. The receptionist still maintained her polite expression, but Elijah noticed the subtle change in her posture. She didn't know who he was calling, but something about his calmness made her uncomfortable. "Yes, I hope. Thanks," he said before ending the call. He put away his cell phone and looked directly at the receptionist. "Should I wait here, or is there somewhere more comfortable while I wait for this vacancy to arise?" The receptionist hesitated. Before he could respond, a tall, gray-haired man in an Italian suit and an air of authority crossed the room with quick steps. Henry Langston, the general manager of Le Grand Lumière. "Dr. Bennett, what a surprise to have you here." His voice was full of forced sympathy. He glanced quickly at the receptionist, who stiffened. "Well, I was surprised too, Henry. It looks like my reservation is gone." Langston smiled nervously. "This must have been a system error, of course. We can resolve this immediately." The hostess opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but Langston was already gesturing to a waiter. "Prepare the best table available for Dr. Bennett, right now." The waiter nodded quickly and left. The receptionist looked at Langston with confusion. "But sir, we were full," Langston cut her off with a sharp look. "I believe some last-minute bookings can be adjusted. Don't you think so, Claire?" The icy tone of his voice left no room for discussion. Claire nodded, her face losing color. "Of course, sir." Elijah watched everything calmly. He could just accept the table and move on with his night. But how many other people had already been rejected in the same way? How many didn't have the privilege of making a connection that changed everything? He crossed his arms. Curious. Langston blinked, forcing a smile. What would be curious? Doctor? Elijah casually pointed to the empty tables. You had free tables all the time, but for some reason one is only now being prepared for me. The manager laughed humorlessly. Oh, it was a regrettable mistake. Nothing beyond that. At this point, other customers at the restaurant began to notice the tension at the entrance. An elegant couple at the nearby table whispered something to each other, casting discreet glances. A socialite, Margaret Whitmore, who had passed Elijah moments before, now watched the scene with visible discomfort. Elijah analyzed Langston for a moment before saying, Right, so tell me, if I hadn't called, would I still be waiting for that vacancy to open up? Langston swallowed. Claire looked away. Elijah nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He took his cell phone out of his pocket again, but this time not to call. He opened the camera and started recording. Langston Empalidasue. Dr. Bennett, I don't think there's any need to... Elijah raised an eyebrow. Oh, I think there is. And at that moment, the situation completely changed. The cold glow of the cell phone in Elijah's hand seemed to cast an invisible shadow over Langston and the receptionist, Claire. They both went rigid, as if they were trying to calculate the damage before the recording even started. Dr. Bennett, I don't see the need to record anything. Everything has already been resolved, right? Langston tried to keep his voice under control, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. Elijah kept the camera trained on him. It depends. Do you believe it would be fair to other clients who have experienced this situation if this was simply swept under the rug? Claire flinched, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze around her. The murmur of voices in the restaurant grew louder as more people realized something was happening. Elijah was no longer alone in this. I just followed the restaurant's protocols, Claire stammered, trying to justify herself. Elijah turned the camera on her. So explain to me, what exactly is the protocol for deciding who can and cannot dine here? Langston opened his mouth to intervene, but a new voice cut through the atmosphere. Yes, I would also like to know. Margaret Whitmore. Everyone turned to the socialite who, moments before, had been welcomed with open arms. She now looked at Claire and Langston with an appraising expression, her eyes narrowed. When I arrived, you didn't even check my name before confirming my reservation. But for him, Margaret indicated Elijah with a gesture of her hand. Was there all this hesitation? Langston tried to smile. Mrs. Whitmore, that was just a mistake. Oh, please. I have been going to this restaurant for years. I know how to recognize when something else is happening. The waiter who had been called to prepare Elijah's table stopped midway, clearly unsure whether he should continue. Langston, realizing the situation was getting out of control, quickly turned to Elijah. Dr. Bennett, I'm truly sorry for any misunderstandings. Please allow us to compensate you. Your meal will be on the house. Elijah smiled slightly, but his gaze remained sharp. This isn't about a free dinner, Langston. It's about a pattern. Claire looked at him, guilt starting to take its toll. I never thought it could make such an impact. And that is exactly the problem. Elijah replied, putting away his cell phone. The entire restaurant now watched in silence. Elijah sighed and picked up his cell phone again, but this time, it didn't record. He sent a message. Langston watched him uneasily. Dr. Bennett? What was that? Elijah put away his phone and looked directly at it. I just sent a message to someone I know in the press. I think this story deserves to be heard by more people. Langston was livid. And at that moment he realized that the situation was far beyond his control. Langston opened and closed his mouth a few times, as if searching for the right words to save himself. But there was no easy way out this time. The restaurant, which minutes before exuded exclusivity and refinement, was now filled with an uncomfortable silence. The customers' eyes burned hotter than any newspaper headline could. "Dr. Bennett, please, we don't need to expose the restaurant like that. I'm sure we can find an amicable solution." Langston's voice wavered between persuasion and despair. Elijah crossed his arms. "Do you want me to just forget? As if nothing had happened? As if I hadn't been treated like an intruder the moment I stepped foot here?" Claire lowered her head. The rigid and arrogant posture he demonstrated before was completely gone. At this point, some customers were discreetly recording with their cell phones. Elijah noticed, but didn't stop it. He was not the one who should fear exposure. Margaret Whitmore, the socialite, took a sip of her wine and shook her head. "Henry, I've seen you bend rules for important clients so many times I've lost count. But today, you made a big mistake." Langston paled. Margaret was one of the restaurant's most influential customers, and if even she was against him, the situation was worse than he imagined. It was then that Claire, visibly nervous, turned to Elijah. "Dr. Bennett, I'm sorry." Elijah watched her for a moment. "Do you know what exactly you are apologizing for? Or are you just trying to fix the situation so you don't lose your job?" Claire opened her mouth but hesitated. Finally, she swallowed and said, "Because I judged you before I even knew who you were. Because I didn't question the rules I follow. Every day." Elijah held her gaze for a moment before slowly nodding. "So I hope the next time someone is treated the same way, you speak up before the situation gets to that point." Claire nodded, embarrassed. Langston, on the other hand, looked at Elijah with something between panic and frustration. "What will happen now?" he asked bluntly. Elijah gave a slight smile. "Oh, Langston, this largely depends on you." He took out his cell phone and opened the conversation he had sent earlier. A simple touch of the screen could get the story out in the local press later that night. Langston swallowed. "What do you want?" Elijah looked around. The restaurant was watching. Society was watching. Change, transparency, and most importantly, guarantees that this will not happen again. Langston had no choice but to agree. Elijah didn't want a free dinner. He wanted transformation. And from that moment on, he would ensure that this restaurant would never be the same. The weight of expectation hung in the air. The entire restaurant waited to see what would happen next. Langston cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. "Dr. Bennett, I understand your concerns. We can work on improvements." Elijah tilted his head, pretending to ponder. "Improvements? So you admit there is a problem?" Langston hesitated. Every word was now a trap, and he knew it. "What I can say is that we value all of our customers." Margaret Whitmore let out a dry laugh. "Do you value it? Only if they're the right kind, right, Langston?" The manager closed his eyes for a moment, visibly holding himself back from losing his cool. Elijah slid his finger across his cell phone, as if he was about to send something. "Let's make this simple, Langston. If you really want to right this wrong, I want to see action. Today." "What do you suggest?" Langston asked, now visibly nervous. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "How about we start with an apology? Public. Here now, in front of all the customers. Who witnessed it? Langston Paladisu. An apology? Exactly. And then a commitment to transparency, with real changes to the restaurant's policy. How about training your team to ensure no one else goes through what I went through?" Langston looked around. Several customers had their cell phones pointed at him, recording his every reaction. There was no easy way out. Claire looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Langston finally sighed, defeated. He turned to Elijah, jaw clenched. "Dr. Bennett, I would like to apologize for any inconvenience you have experienced this evening." Elijah crossed his arms. Inconvenient. Langston clenched his fists. He knew he needed to do better. "I'm sorry for the way you were treated. This does not reflect the values we want to convey, and I guarantee changes will be made to prevent this from happening again." Elijah kept his gaze on him for a few moments, assessing whether that was genuine or just an attempt to end the situation. Then, he turned off his cell phone without sending the message to the press. "Let's see if you keep your word, Langston." Margaret Whitmore clapped slowly, and soon a few other customers followed suit. The restaurant would never be the same. Again. The tension in the restaurant began to dissipate, but the impact of the night still lingered in the air. Langston rubbed his forehead, realizing that nothing more could be done to reverse what was already exposed. Elijah pocketed his cell phone and turned to Margaret Whitmore. "I believe my table is ready now, isn't it?" Langston quickly gestured to a waiter. "Of course, Dr. Bennett. Please allow me to accompany you." But Elijah raised his hand, stopping him. "It is not necessary. I prefer someone else to serve me." Langston clenched his jaw but nodded. Claire, the receptionist, looked away, looking even more embarrassed. As Elijah walked to the table, the eyes of other customers followed his steps. Some waved in support, others continued whispering. But one thing was certain: no one else would look at that restaurant the same way. When he sat down, a different waiter handed him the menu with a respectful smile. "What do you want tonight, doctor?" Elijah took a quick look at the menu before closing it. "A peaceful moment. That's enough." The waiter nodded and walked away. Elijah took out his cell phone and opened the messages. The press contact was still there. He could have ruined the restaurant's reputation in an instant, but instead, he just sent a different message. "The changes start now. Let's see if they deliver on what they promised." He placed his cell phone on the table and took a deep breath. He didn't come there to destroy. He came to transform. 3 months later, Elijah walked again through the streets of New York towards the Great Light. He had not returned since that night, but he had been following the changes promised by Langston from afar. As he approached the restaurant, he noticed something different right at the entrance. A new, clearly visible sign highlighted the establishment's policy of inclusion and respect. He entered and headed to the reception desk. This time, a different young receptionist greeted him with a genuine smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Le Grand Lumière. Do you have a reservation?" "Sim, Elijah Bennett." She quickly checked it into the system and nodded. "Yes, Dr. Bennett. Your table is ready. Can you accompany me?" Elijah followed the receptionist into the lounge and noticed another big change. The employees were more diverse, and the environment seemed more welcoming. There was a real effort to change, and it was evident. As he passed the bar, he saw a familiar figure, Margaret Whitmore, the socialite, who smiled when she saw him. "Dr. Bennett, I said I'd be back, and apparently you will too." Elijah smiled and gave a slight nod. "I had to see if the change was real." Margaret raised her wine glass in a symbolic toast. "And then? Approve?" He looked around once more. The restaurant had learned its lesson. "I think so." As he sat at the table, he received a message on his cell phone. It was from one of the journalists he had contacted that night months ago. "It looks like your test worked. The restaurant revamped its policies and started training employees on inclusion. It looks like you got what you wanted." Elijah smiled. He didn't want revenge. He wanted change. And that night, it became clear that he had achieved it.